mentioned that I was from Canada. I grew up in a lumber town, and called Prince George, which has 78 frost-free days every single year. Neither of my parents went to university, and I don't think I ever could have imagined that the pathways that I took I would have taken if it hadn't been for members of my community who reached out and shone lights down paths that I hadn't imagined and my parents hadn't imagined, and really I didn't see. And that kindness in communities is something that drives me today, and has driven me since then, to do all sorts of things. It kind of started with a fellow called Dwayne Rubidoux, who was introduced me by one of my neighbors, and he was the first person I met that had ever gone to university, and he loved his job. He was a psychologist, and it was he that said, you should concentrate on your studies in school because you might, maybe you should think about university, and nobody ever suggested that to me before. And that sent me down a path that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And when I was at university, I met another teacher called Jean Leponce, and he again saw a completely different path for me than I had seen. And he also told me that I needed to pull up my socks. Because he said, when you speak, I can really understand that you don't understand quite a lot about the world, and you need to read something called The Economist, because you think the world is very small, but it's very big. So that's what I think you should do. So being a good student, I sort of started reading it, and I'm still glued to it every week. And it's one of the best pieces of advice, because again, the world seems very small when you open yourself up to it. From that, I ended up, for my first degree, I sort of ended up here at the London School of Economics. And it was because I admired the Director General, and I liked some of the books that he'd written, which is a little bit opportunistic or even almost random. But that is what brought me to the London School of Economics, and that changed my life entirely. I was in a small program around in economics and in industrial relations, and there were 28 different nations in my small one-year top masters. And I really understood how small the world was after that. But it was there that I met a mentor who became an angel investor in my business. But he told me that I was an entrepreneur. And I'd probably been highly academic up until then and just been very studious. But he sort of shone a light down another path that I hadn't imagined, and introduced me to people who had been in business. And I hadn't really thought about business particularly. I've also played around with different aspects of the economy. As you mentioned, I sort of tried some policy stuff. I've tried some education stuff. And I've been trying to understand what drives an economy and what makes it work economically. The work from the Crick Institute really changed I pivoted again after doing the work for the government, which was how do you stimulate economic growth? And I probably thought that I was writing a finance treatise at the time, because I had done so many things in financial services. And I was really surprised after taking that year out and taking sabbatical from all sorts of things to learn that I'd written about talent and leadership and procurement and how you do business with other businesses, not only in one country, but also in other countries. And that has led me to do a bunch of other things. One of the themes throughout that comes out again and again and again is 93%. So if you talk to big businesses, they say that the number one problem for the economy is skills. But that's only sort of about 56, 57%. If you talk to the fast-growing companies, that narrow subsector, at the time that I wrote the report in 2014, it was 82% were saying that the single thing that prevented them from taking additional customer orders was access to people with the right skill set. If you look at that, recently in the most recent survey that we published, it's up to 93% now. So the skills crisis is very real, and it's something that we can and should do something about. So I've been worrying about that, and if I have a call out to you in the room, it's going to be, let's do something together and make sure that we don't have to suffer from the skills crisis. I think I was kind of surprised to find that 100% of the net new jobs came from companies less than 5 years old. I was also surprised to find that 45% of the GDP were from companies that didn't exist 15 years ago, because the velocity and the momentum of the restructuring of the economy was kind of invisible to me before I started thinking about it really hard. I think I'd listened to government and politicians before when they were talking about people being not in employment, education, or training, and I didn't really think that 1 million people not in employment, education, or training, I didn't really correspond in thinking that there were more open jobs that couldn't be filled than the number of people who are currently NEET. And that's the problem that we really need to think about as we recalibrate and help people adjust to the new economies and the new economic realities.